Welcome to Beware of Spoilers. I am Adam, and I hope the beginning of that didn't get cut off because I looked at it very briefly and it didn't quite start recording where I thought it did. Last movie we talked about was Vice. And I think I did Geostorm on this too, which is going to come into play. And as you know, one of my favorite movies in the history of cinema is Independence Day. And its perfectly serviceable sequel, Independence Day Resurgence, which I know is an unpopular opinion. But it's a fine movie. Perfectly fine. Exactly the level of crazy and stupid that I was hoping for when I walked into it. And who would have thought that, people weren't going to like it. So, the movie we talk about today is similar to Geostorm and similar to Independence Day. Because it seems like it's very heavily inspired by the producer and director of these movies, Roland Emmerich, the man, the myth, the legend himself, who creates disaster porn like it's nobody's business. The movie I'm talking about is called Wandering Earth. You probably didn't hear of it because I didn't know it existed until I saw it on AMC Stubbs A-List. And it came up as something that was playing in my local theater. I was looking for something to see today that wasn't, well, first of all, I was looking to see if either The Green Book or The Favorite was playing, and neither of those were. So I was like, okay, what else can I watch? And it's like, well, not really into Happy Death Day to You, not really into I'll See Alita Tomorrow. This was playing, Wandering Earth. And it sounded cool, and I looked up what it was, because I made the mistake of going into Roma blind, and that was an emotionally draining experience. And I'll talk about that on this week's Oscars extravaganza on 30-minute reviews. But this movie doesn't quite have that emotional, hit to it. But that's not what the point is. I looked it up to see what it was about. And the basic premise is the sun's dying, so they gotta push the Earth somewhere else. So that way, it doesn't die with it. So, some interstellar in there. There's a lot of things that you can tell were not ripped, but lovingly homaged to other movies, and it really is a love letter to the genre of science fiction, this movie. And the acting's pretty good, but there are a few things that maybe it's just because the movie's not in English, and it's literally translated. So maybe it's just I'm missing things because of a cultural disconnect between me and the movies in Mandarin Chinese, and maybe it's just a cultural disconnect between expressions and idiomatic expressions and things like that, that maybe it just was lost on me. But we'll get to that a little bit later. So the movie is that was the movie's basic premise, and I saw that its visual effects are amazing. And it's definitely worth seeing it for that alone. So, let's talk about what my major issues are with this movie, because I think that's probably my best place to start, is that this movie isn't functionally bad. It's not like some other movies that are functionally inept that I've seen in the last year or so. Don't Worry, He Won't Get Far on Foot had a lot of functional problems, and I think this movie's fundamental problem is, from a storytelling perspective, the relationships between the characters that appear throughout the movie are not quite defined well. And it's like, okay, so we know that in the very beginning of the movie we have the father, his dad, and the son. Then we go into there's a beginning, almost like a prologue, where it's like the dad says he's going up to space, leaves the son with the grandfather. And then we learn a little bit about the Wandering Earth Initiative, whatever it was called, where they're going to move the Earth to another solar system so that way the sun doesn't eat it, as it expands and then explodes. So then we jump forward 17 years, and the dad's up on the space station, the son's on down the ground, and this is where I see the similarities to Geostorm. Maybe it's just a coincidence, considering how close in proximity these two movies are, considering one was in 2016, I believe, and one was now, but it's also far enough apart we can say it's an homage in terms of the styling and the way the story kind of works, jumping between the two, where there's a plot on the space station, and there's a plot on the planet itself, and they kind of intertwine a little bit, but not as much as you would like. So anyway, we have the the people on the space station know they're running into a risk because it's like they have to slingshot around Jupiter, use Jupiter's gravity to propel themselves further into the new solar system using all that. That's actually not explained until the very end of the movie as to why that needed to happen. And I don't know if that's poor editing or if that's a mess up on the framing device's part, because it's obvious the movie utilizing a framing device explaining what the Wandering Earth Initiative is. But that's that I think is a debate for another day, whether or not that was just edited poorly. So we find out at the end of the movie that the purpose is that way they can conserve fuel. They're going to slingshot around Jupiter using its gravity to do that. Now, of course, things go awry, because as these things do, otherwise there wouldn't be a movie if things didn't go awry. So we have the Earth gets too close to Jupiter, so on the space station, it turns out that there was a second thing where, like Interstellar, where it's like, we're going to try and save humanity, but if we can't save humanity, we're going to, try and build a new humanity somewhere else. And that's basically what the plan is. And we find that out again later, too, because the whole Helios project isn't quite explained or even talked about or anything like that until, like, the middle of the second act, or very late second act. So the Earth starts falling apart. And this is another problem I have with this movie, is that if you follow the story on the surface, is that there's no clear-cut objective starting out, or the main character on the surface, the sun, doesn't have a clear motivation. Why does he want to leave? What's waiting for him? Where he wants to go? Where does he want to go, even? All of that stuff's kind of not explained, and it's not ever explained, and there's no good reason why it's not explained. I mean, I guess it's not important, because fundamentally the plot comes in and kind of pushes him along for the rest of the movie, but it'd be nice to know why he wants to leave the underground city he's living in so badly. What's there and what's somewhere else that makes him want to leave so badly? And the movie doesn't quite explain that to you, or show you even, or give you any indication what that is. Because, like, his family's there, his father will be returning in a day. What's so bad about there compared to other places? Why does he want to go out and see the world? Is he just have wanderlust? Is he trying to escape something? There's no clear reason why he wants to leave. So we have this issue with that. They get arrested at a checkpoint. Him and his sister, who are both main characters. Grandfather comes to get them, and then the earthquakes start happening from being too close to Jupiter. And this is where our plot really hits a turbulence a little bit. Because fundamentally, this is a pretty sound setup. But the problem is, we have the issue that a lot of people pointed out with Jyn Erso from Rogue One, is that the plot doesn't really happen. She doesn't proactively affect the plot as a protagonist. The plot happens to her, and she goes along with it. And that's what happens with the characters here. They aren't quite propelling the plot themselves. Everyone around them is propelling the plot around them, and then they're just like, fuck it, what are we going to do? Let's just go with it. And therein lies probably one of the biggest fundamental issues with this movie, is that until the third act, the second act, and they come up with the plan at the very end, and then into the third act, the protagonists don't actually have an active role in the movie. Until it's fundamentally, they're the only ones left to make decisions. They're like, well, you know what, let's do it. Because, like, first it's like, okay, we want to go home. And then it's like, okay, we got to help move this core thing to where it needs to go. And then it's like, okay, well, now we want to go home again. And it's like, okay, well, now there's no other choice, but we got to try and do this. Because, like, well, I don't like it in these disaster movies maybe it's just, this is probably just a me thing, but if you're going to do a disaster movie, make sure that the protagonists in the disaster movie actively want to save the Earth and aren't just doing it for their own self-preservation because they've exhausted all the other options. Maybe that's just me who doesn't like it when that happens, because it feels not disingenuous, but it feels kind of like they're like, well, what else are we going to do? And it's like, that's not really a hero, which is what you kind of are expecting in a movie like this. You're expecting someone to stand up and be like, this is what needs to happen for the betterment of everyone around me, not just for me. but the movie doesn't quite do that. It kind of just keeps the what's it called? It kind of just keeps them going. Like they just kind of keep moving along with the plot because they have no other choice really. So then like they don't really like, and then all these characters start dying as they do in disaster movies, and because characters are dying, you feel bad because like, and they always do this weird thing. I don't know if it's a thing in Chinese cinema that they do, but anytime a character dies, they get a short monologue from beyond the grave, not to anyone in specific, more to the audience, and talking about and that's the only time we really get the relationship development, is talking to the audience about the relationship to other characters. And it's like there's no real reason, and then it's like, and then we get toward the third act. We get a nice homage at the end of this movie to Independence Day, and I think we'll wrap up with the plot summary there, where the father in the future, and again I call this show Beware of Spoilers because we're going to spoil the movie. The father, who's on the space station above them, flies a suicide mission into this beam they're firing at Jupiter to try and like what's the word I'm looking for? They're flying it at Jupiter to create a propulsion wave that kind of shoots off and saves everyone on the planet. They can't quite reach it with the wave that they created, so they need to get another little bump of juice in there. So when that happens, the father flies the spaceship that's got all the stuff, all the fuel in it, into it to kind of create an explosion and a shockwave that send Earth away. And it's very much like what the redneck dad from Independence Day does when he flies his plane. In the original cut, he flew his little biplane with a missile attached, but they edited it to be to make it a more spur of the moment suicide mission, which I agree with that decision in the movie, but that's not the point. We're not talking about Independence Day. We're talking about Wandering Earth, and he flies in as a suicide mission to save everyone on Earth, and and then things happen, and that's functionally the end of the movie, because then the Earth is propelled away. Yay! Everyone's saved, and that's the that's the end of the movie. But I think fundamentally going forward with movies like this, what needs to happen, and if you look at Geostorm had a lot of problems, but the character relationships and how people felt towards each other was always clearly defined. In this movie, character relationships aren't defined, and that's because they keep jumping around from person to person to person to person to person, and they don't ever give you time with any character to quite establish a relationship with them. They're all just something that serves a purpose to the plot, more of an object than they are a human with emotions. They're all one-dimensional. That they all have fundamental emotions, and they have a Sims-like relationship to each other, where it's like friends, grandfather, best friend, not even best friend, like acquaintance that they met in a jail. But there's no real depth to it. There's nothing more than a superficial familiar relationship or anything like that. And because of that, you're supposed to feel bad. And that's what they really needed, would have made this movie a lot better, is if we had concrete family relationships, and concrete, like, if they had depth to them, and if the characters had more than just what their role was, and like a single or two personality traits, like scared sister, like over the top tough brother who's like trying to make himself look tougher than he is, grandfather, which is his entire character is grandfather. And it's like the dad is dad. There's stereotypical Russian. Like that's everyone's just a one-dimensional, like not stereotype, but a one-dimensional character. And that's fundamentally where the movie falls apart for me. I don't think it's going to be my top 10 list at the end of this year. But it's still pretty solid entry to start the year off. So if you haven't seen it, give it a shot. The movie is entirely in Mandarin, so if you don't want to watch a movie with subtitles, maybe this movie's not for you. But if you don't have a problem watching a movie with subtitles, then this movie definitely is worth a watch. If purely for the visual effects, they do a great job on this movie with just the effects alone. And this movie's doing very well in China so far. It's something like 500 million. So yeah, so definitely check it out. Wandering Earth. It's going to be in theaters for a little bit, I think. Considering like today they had like 5 showings, and usually my theater shows a few Bollywood movies every once in a while. And they only run like 1 day or 2 days. This has a substantial theatrical run here, longer even than The Favorite. I've seen more showings for this than I've seen for The Favorite during its entire run, and I didn't see any for Cold War, and I really want to see that. So yeah, definitely check this out. We'll wrap up there for today, though. Have a good week.